Hello, Dr. Keith here. So today I'm going to talk about the basic principles you should think about when you're putting together your results section for your research paper. The results section is where you present your data and only your data in as clear, concise and simple way as possible so that the reader quickly and easily understands what happens, but also how your results relate to the research questions that you should have put at the end of your introduction section. Now, before you start putting your results section together, I really recommend you choose the journal now that you want to submit your research to. And the reason is this: all journals in their instructions for authors will give limits to figure numbers and table numbers that you're allowed. Now don't forget, this is a limit, it's not a target, so you don't have to do that many, but it will really help you think about how to structure and shape your results. And it's a lot easier to do at the start rather than do everything, find out what you need to do at the end, and then you sort of have to reverse engineer your results so it fits in with what the journal wants, which is a lot more time consuming. So do it first. Thinking about presenting your data, again, just to reinforce the point, you want to do it in a sort of simple, clear way for the reader. So this will generally be harder for you, the writer. And the main decision that you will have is whether the data should go in a figure, a sort of visual representation of the data, or whether it should go in a table, a sort of text, numerical based way of presenting it. Now, there's no definitive way of doing it, but I'm just going to look at a couple of examples to give you a feeling for which might be better for your data. So, thinking about figures first. So figures are excellent for showing how data compares to each other, for showing trends, for showing sort of temporal change with time. I would say anything that is your most important findings, the data that's related to your most important findings, I would try and put it in a figure, in some kind of visual way if possible. Because if you think, when you're flicking through a paper, so you've read the abstract, you think it might be interesting, you just flick through it, and it's the plots that will really draw your eye and get your attention, and it's getting the reader's attention that will help you get cited, and citation is the aim of the game. So to show how a figure works, let's just take a really simple example. Here's a study I've made up where I'm looking at how much aquatic plant grows in a pond in relation to two different nutrients, two different chemicals in the water that they may or may not use. So looking at the table of data, I mean, obviously it's quite complicated. It's just not instantly easy to work out what's going over time. But when we convert that into a plot, we can really quickly see that nutrient 1, there's some kind of relationship with how the plants are growing, but nutrient 2, there's really no relationship. And that's even for someone who's not a biologist or a chemist. It's really clear what is going on. Now, the way I've presented it, because biomass is in mass, the plant is in mass, so the unit there is grams, but the nutrients are in a different unit in grams per litre, so I've got a secondary axis. Now, when you're doing a plot like this, I would really recommend that you don't do more than a primary and a secondary y-axis. It just gets too complicated. Try not to cram too much information onto your plot. And if you feel like your plot is getting too busy, too much information, try and think of separating it out into separate graphs that sit under each other but form one plot. Try and group them. If you've got parameters that group together easily, plot them together and divide it out that way. So we can see that plot was excellent for showing variability and some really good detail. But overall, we can't quite work out exactly what the numbers are. Moving on to tables. So tables are really good for presenting multiple parameters where the units are different, for presenting the results of statistical tests, for example, where you are summing data together. So instead of, say, we're interested in what's happening hour by hour, if you've got a data set and it's just for a season or for a year or some way of summing it, think about putting it in a table. And where you want to show a range of numbers that people may want to cite, then think about putting that kind of information into a table. Let's give an example of where I'm going to give a table. So I've done a survey to see where we have tree coverage in a countryside area, but the parameters that I'm looking at all have very different units. So for example, we've got trees per square kilometre, rainfall in millimetres per year, annual irradiance, the amount of sunshine that you get in Einsteins per metre squared, elevation range in metres, average humidity in percentage, and temperature range in degrees centigrade. So we can see from this table, although there's lots of different units here which would produce multiple y-axes on a sort of scatter plot, this is a really easy way of presenting that kind of data, and it's really quick and easy for the reader to be able to get a broad picture of what's going on. And a good example of where this really works is with temperature. So for example, in this I don't want to know the temperature every second and do a plot that shows temperature change second by second. I just want a broad understanding of what that range of temperature is. So sometimes if you've got lots of data, it's really tempting just to do a scatter plot and show it's a really high resolution data set. But if the resolution of the data set is not important to the research question, it's not important for the reader, so don't show it because it's going to distract from another data set that it is important for where you want to show that resolution and short-term changes. So think about putting that kind of information in a table. Now, I've just said that if you want to present figures, numbers in your results, a table is a really good way of doing it, to help someone cite those numbers. But please don't forget, if some of your really important results are just single numbers like a maximum or a minimum or a range, you don't have to use a table if you want to state that, because when you're writing your results, which I'll move on to in a moment, that's the kind of information that you're going to write about your plot. The maximum number, the minimum number, and the range. So don't immediately think, I want to say what this number is, I have to do a table. You can still get that information over to the reader using a more visual representation like a scatter plot. And lastly, in terms of the visual representation of the data, if you've seen how someone else has presented very similar data to yours or a similar style of data to yours and you really like it, please just copy the way that they have done it. It's not plagiarism. Plagiarism is taking someone else's data or someone else's writing and not recognising that they are the source of it. Just taking a style and using it again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I mean, I don't know how many times I've used a scatter plot in the papers I've published, but I certainly didn't invent the scatter plot myself. So don't worry about it. If you see a style of plot that you really like, please use it because it's effective. It's worked for them and it's more than likely to work for you. So thinking about writing about the data. Now, a lot of people, especially if you've got English as a second language, the writing is a bit harder. They often say this: why can't they just look at the data? The data's there, please just take it away, look at it, isn't it obvious? Well, you can't do that. So as a way to help you think about this and why it's so important, just think about a talk that you've attended or talking to someone about results. Now, when you go to a talk and someone stands up, the last thing you want them to do really is just to put the data up and not say anything about it. It's a lot easier when that speaker leads you through the data. And that is what writing about the results is doing. You are simply leading the reader through the results section. So as a way to start doing this, just talk out loud about what are the important things that your results are showing? And honestly, that is the basis of what you need to write about. And then you can just tidy it up and refocus it, etc. But to get started, just do it that way. And it's really important that you write this effectively, because what you are trying to do is show the reader how you are answering the research questions that you've posed in the introduction, how this relates to your results in the results section, and then you go on to build on this in the discussion. Now, when you're writing about your results, it's really tempting, it's almost irresistible when you first start doing this, to start comparing your results to other work that you have done, other papers that have been published, other stuff that is not a part of your study. You cannot do this. In the results section, you simply describe the results that you are presenting and nothing more. No context, no comparison. Now, this seems a bit of a pain. You kind of really want to do it, but the reason why it's useful that you don't have to do this in your results section is that these kind of comparisons with other studies, so say like my tree cover study, I might want to say, oh, and this result compares to Smith et al. 2020, and it's really different. But that kind of statement forms the sort of basis and introduction of your discussion. So you want those sentences to be saved up to use later to start off your discussion. They form really useful ways of starting subsections. Just do a simple comparison of your results with someone else, what's similar, what's different, and that really helps you get the discussion moving. So, no comparisons to other people's data in the results section. Now, I'm going to do some more detailed videos about how you actually write this and how you want to present stuff, what makes a good plot, what makes a good way to write it. So I hope you'll watch those. But if you have any other suggestions of any topics or subjects you'd like me to discuss, please leave a comment below and I'll see what I can do. So like, subscribe, and thank you for your time.